Hi, what we'd like to talk about today is the corruption of science across Queensland and across our country. And I'll start with a report that we released, we commissioned at our office. It's Dr. Alan Moran, who simply portrays the government's own data on the cost of climate policies and renewable energy policies. And it shows a cost of $13 billion every year around our country, which works out at $1,300 per household around the year on top of our electricity bill. So then what we've also done is over the last 4 years, I've investigated the CSIRO. In fact, I've cross-examined them. I've asked them to present me with the evidence that we're doing something with climate and we need to stop it. And it's very surprising that they have never ever said that carbon dioxide from human activity needs to be, there's a danger. Never said that. So we asked them who has, and they said the politicians have said that. They also admitted that today's temperatures are not unprecedented. They also ultimately relied always on computerised models which are unvalidated and have been proven wrong. They have never presented any evidence that of any impact of our carbon dioxide from human activity, transport, agriculture, mining, manufacturing, at all, on any climate factor at all. So what we've also seen with them is that they have presented papers to us, scientific papers, as evidence, and then we've cross-examined those papers and the CSIRO, and they have withdrawn the papers. They're that shoddy. So as a result of that, we've been recognising that the corruption of science is right across the country and right across the state. And we're going through the whole of Queensland and looking at the impacts of this corrupted science on regions. So we've asked Curly here to talk about the impact of corrupt science here on the timber industry, which is devastating Maryborough.
Well, as far as the timber industry goes, there's no scientific evidence that locking up forest or any native forest has any benefit whatsoever to that forest. And matter of fact, on the practical side of it, it's quite contrary to that. By locking up forest or having farmers think that their long-term harvest prospects are not going to be there, we're actually doing more harm to the environment and to the conservation side of things than what it would be if we sustainably log those areas. Now, those areas have been logged for a couple hundred years, I suppose, and left alone, they will produce forever. The way things are happening at the moment, because of this false science, as been stated, farmers are harvesting their properties prematurely, which is not in the proper manner to protect long term. And if they lock the timber up, we have these massive fires come through, and as we've heard in just recent days, they reckon that 70% of the koala population in northern New South Wales disappeared in those fires. Now, get used to it, because there's going to be a lot more of those fires. The more we lock up, the more we don't harvest our country in a proper manner, apart from opening it up and fire breaks and everything else. Once it's locked up, no one goes in, no one can get there, no one can put the fire out. It's absolutely detrimental to policy at the moment, created on scientific evidence.
And what's really annoying is that these things are done in the name of science or justified by science, and that's rubbish. And these things are also done in the name of the environment, and it's actually harming the environment.
Absolutely.
So to speak about the destruction of science in this country, we've also got Dr. Peter Ridd, who's a well-known scientist.
So I'm mostly interested in the Great Barrier Reef, and you'll know that the Mary River has been now categorised as a Great Barrier Reef catchment, and all sorts of extra legislation is now on that. And yet the Great Barrier Reef is hundreds of kilometres to the north, and yet the scientists tell us that the water running down here is somehow killing the reef, even though the ocean currents are going in the same direction. Maryborough, more than anything, anywhere, is an example of where bad science is being used to damage the local area.
And the local community.
Yeah.
Rosie, Carly, over to you.
Yeah, so what are you actually calling for today with all this evidence at hand?
We're calling for an Office of Scientific Integrity to be established federally, but also I'd imagine we could look at that for doing it statewide as well. But I'm a federal senator, not a state politician. But ultimately, we'd like to see it in state and federal, wouldn't you?
Yes, so I've been calling for an Office of Science Integrity or Science Quality Assurance to check the science that's been used for making major public policy decisions, whether they're state or federal.
Curly, what cost is it coming out to your business?
What cost?
Is it coming out to your business, this
the science that you're talking about today? How is it costing your business?
Well, country that we should normally be able to harvest and things like that being locked up, which means that we've got to produce smaller timber. We can't, because of uncertainty of harvest and supply going forward, we can't go out and invest a heap of money, which we'd like to do, to make all our businesses more commercially viable. And we could create a lot more jobs if we had certainty of harvest on a bigger area. The area's contracting all the time, so we're out there trying to get the resource becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, which needs different equipment to what we've been used to saw our logs. And it's just a holdback, from regional Queensland. So it's it's very costly. It's very, it could be a fantastic industry. It's being destroyed.
Carly, it's costing hundreds of millions of dollars for cane farmers.
Yep.
It's costing many millions of dollars, probably actually billions of dollars for beef graziers around the state in losing their property rights and not being able to control their land. What we've actually got is a huge burden on every farm, every family farm, every small business, because they can't use their land as they wanted to use it. And they've got bureaucrats in Brisbane and Canberra telling them how to use their land. And that's ridiculous. We've now got nationalised farming, which is a steady road to ruin.
Something we have heard from cane farmers is having to address an extra level of red tape now as well, which is very, time consuming and doesn't make much sense to them in a lot of ways.
That's correct. They estimate the red tape will cost them $130 million a year in lost productivity, and that will go on forever. And that's above and beyond all the other costs of the red tape. So, for example, if you want to change from cane farming to some other cropping, you actually effectively have to have an environmental impact study in order to be able to do it, and that could cost you tens of thousands of dollars. And a bureaucrat is going to have to tick whether you're going to be allowed to do that.
And what really annoys me is the fact that they've been demonising, the bureaucrats and the politicians in this state have been demonising farmers and criminalising farmers, and that's a fact. It's not exaggeration, that's a fact. They're criminalising farmers, and they're also doing the same to foresters, fishermen or fishers, and there's no reason for that, because every farmer knows that if he wants or she wants to have a long-term sustainable farm, they have to look after the environment. And the environment needs a sustainable farming community. So the future of civilization, the future of farming needs the environment, and the future of the environment needs good, healthy farming. And the government makes out that the farmers and the environment are opposed to each other. They're not. That's what really gets up our nose.
In terms of the Great Barrier Reef, what impact would you say this area is having, if at all?
Absolutely zero. There is no possibility that any of the water that comes down the Mary River can affect the Great Barrier Reef. It is just incredible that the scientists are proposing this.
Well, Carly, we can go a step further. When we were questioning the so-called reef scientists, I call them academics because they're not following the scientific process. They're not scientists, they're academics. And what they said, they admitted, and it had never been admitted before, correct me if I'm wrong, that 3% of the reef is in a reef and affected by the rivers coming off the coast. If you then look at only half of them are in Cape York, so the other half are affected by runoff from agricultural areas, 1.5%, and those areas are naturally clouded. Okay, so if you look at the middle reef and the outer reef, there is no cloudiness, no impact, and they've never measured any excess nitrogen, and they've never measured pesticides. There's no impact whatsoever. And then the reef scientists or academics stopped measuring or publicising the growth rates of coral from 2005 onwards. So we've got no data to base it on anyway. I mean, it's complete rubbish, and they're wrecking the barrier reef tourism industry, they're wrecking the farming sector, and everybody who eats food in this state will be paying for it. And it's nonsense.
What are the consequences, I guess, scientifically, of not agreeing with what they're trying to say?
Well, you can certainly get into a lot of trouble if you cross the conventional wisdom, put it that way.
There's another consequence. Well, keep going, Pete.
Is it hard to sort of make an opposing case when there is that pressure
I think a lot of scientists are put off by that. So there's a lot of scientists who would agree with me that the Great Barrier Reef is not particularly badly damaged, but they're not willing to say a great deal because it's very bad for your career. There's no doubt about that.
There's something else, Carly, that's really important. Before the scientific process came out and we started using these scientific methodologies hundreds of years ago, the people who controlled the show were the people who were the biggest in terms of financial clout, the religious power, the state power, the landlords, the people who had physical clout. The bullies prevailed. Then when we had the scientific method, we could have an honest assessment of the data, and that brought us objectivity, which brings us freedom. And what they're doing is they're shutting down voices of dissent, voices that are based on data, and they're now making it back to the rule of the bully. So you've got the bureaucrats now with the bullies, and you've got vested interests now with the bullies, and every large solar industrial complex, wind turbine, is costing everyone here money and destroying jobs and exporting them to China. That's the real problem, the loss of freedom.
Gentlemen, who would you like to see head this integrity unit?
We need some respected scientists who understand about some of the problems that we know are occurring in science, not just in the environmental science, but also even in the biomedical area, and to essentially look at each of these major policy areas and focus in on the scientific papers that need to be quality audited and do those audits. So there's no shortage of scientists who can do this.
We saw last week that we're facing a recession, so who would fund this?
Well, you're talking about very small amounts of money. So, for example, to do a quality audit on Great Barrier Reef science, we've estimated would only cost $5 million. And when you consider it, they're going to spend $500 million in the next few years on it, it's a very, very small amount of money. Quality assurance is really important. The car that you buy, probably about 20 to 30% of the cost of that goes into quality assurance systems. And all I'm asking for is 1% of the money we spend on the reef to go into quality assurance.
And big expenditures in America, for example, in the Defence Department, where it's multi-billion-dollar investment cost, they're actually using a blue team, red team approach, so that the scientists who are pushing for a cause, the Defence Department forms another body to oppose them, because the true way science is done is if a scientist raises something, the others take a sceptical approach until he or she is proven right or wrong. So this is nothing costly. In fact, it's an investment because the cost and saved to the community would be enormous.
It's also, the quality assurance in science is a system that's used in the commercial scientific area all the time. So we're just saying, let's make sure it's also used for public good science, science that's used for making public policy.
Has the issue of climate become too politicised, do you think?
It's always been politicised, that's all it is, because, as I said, in this report on the CSIRO, we cross-examined the CSIRO over a period of 4 years, 2 years intensely, and they have never been able to provide us with the evidence. The onus is clearly on government, state and federal, who are now wrecking this country with trillions of dollars worth of impact on our industry. The onus is on them to provide the evidence. That has never been done anywhere. I've cross-examined NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies. They have not been able to provide the evidence, but they have been able to admit that some of the things they're saying are false. So that's NASA. We know that the United Nations climate body has never provided any evidence anywhere, and we know that for a fact. So it is completely politicised. There's no scientific basis for it whatsoever.